Hello and welcome to BKK Climate Change Hackathon. And this is part of the series of the webinar that we're going to have as part of this hackathon organized by the British Embassy Bangkok. And welcome to the webinar live here with me, 𝗕𝗫𝗴𝗸𝗁𝗀𝗃 from Asia Impact Venture. So within this hackathon, within the series of webinars, we've been talking about many things. I'm talking about COP60 and COP26. There are 4 themes that we're going to focus within this hackathon, starting by the last topics that we discussed last week: clean growth and adaptation, climate adaptation. How can we grow our economy while maintain the emission, or actually reduce the emissions of ourselves in each country and in each business? At the same time, as we all know, that some of the effects of climate change is not available, but how can we help and how can we live with it? How can we adapt ourselves and support the people to adapt themselves? And that's part of climate adaptations and clean growth we discussed in the last webinar. However, that's not all stories. Within the 4 topics, there are still more topics, 2 more topics that we're gonna cover today. First, nature-based solution. There were many things and many solutions that we were inspired by the nature, and actually the nature provides a lot of solution for us as well. A lot of innovation actually inspired by nature. And for this climate change, in fact, nature can provide a lot of solutions for us as well. But what is it? What are those solutions that we can get from the nature? We're going to figure it out today. The second topic that we're going to talk about today can be climate finance. Of course, everything needs finance to be realistic. How can we mobilize the fund? But before that, what actually is climate finance? A lot of people talk about it, but that's one of the first questions we're going to ask today. Last but not least, after hearing all of this knowledge and experience shared by all the guests that we're going to have tonight, if you are really interested in making different, please join our hackathon. It's going to be organized on the 7th and the 8th of November next month, a few weeks away from now, at 𝗕𝗫𝗴𝗸𝗁𝗀𝗃 at 𝗕𝗫𝗴𝗁𝗀𝗃 BTS station. You can find the link somewhere right here, and you can go at 𝗕𝗫𝗴𝗸𝗁𝗀𝗃 website, and you should be able to register. There'll be a lot of amazing workshop from a lot of from many topics and many representatives from many organizations during those 2 days. Without further ado, it's very honor for us to have 3 distinguished guests today. First, 𝗕𝗫𝗴𝗁𝗀𝗃, Managing Director of 𝗕𝗫𝗴𝗁𝗀𝗃, and secondly, 𝗕𝗫𝗴𝗃𝗃, the consultant and biodiversity finance initiative of BIOFIN, UNDP, and third, last but not least, 𝗀𝗫𝗴𝗃𝗃, Forestry Officer of FAO, the United Nations. So without further ado, I would love to have all of the panelists to introduce themselves, starting by Ricardo, and welcome to this webinar. Rick, please.
Great. Firstly, thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. So I've been working for BIOFIN Thailand for about 2 years now. Before that, I worked in research and communications in the field of environmental economics. Biodiversity Finance Initiative is a project managed by the United Nations Development Programme, with a presence in over 30 countries, including Thailand. So the BIOFIN approach, first of all, is to gain an overview of the country's biodiversity finance landscape, and then to follow this up with a much more accurate assessment of the country's biodiversity expenditures and biodiversity funding needs. So for a country like Thailand, we've been able to use this evidence base to then identify and plan for potential solutions that help to scale up investments in biodiversity domestically. So right now, BIOFIN is continuing to provide support on the implementation of prioritized finance solutions, which form part of a biodiversity finance plan for Thailand. And this plan works as a kind of portfolio of financial solutions focusing on marine and coastal ecosystems, wildlife, and other conservation projects at national and local levels. I guess I'll just add that biodiversity loss and climate change are interconnected, and the science is telling us that good biodiversity management can slow down climate change. So both need to be tackled together. So I in that sense, I look forward to hearing from the other panelists on how nature-based solutions can hopefully get us to where we want to go. And and I look forward to sharing some of our experience with BIOFIN. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rick. And talking about bio and nature-based solutions, here we have Johnny Zapata as well from FAO. Would you mind giving a little bit of introductions, Johnny, about yourself and a little bit of work of FF and FAO?
Thank you for the invitation to this panel, and also thank you for the audience that is following us in this webinar. I am Johnny Zapata. I am forestry officer in the FAO, that is United Nations for Food and Agriculture, and I work in a program called Forest and Farm Facility. The Forest and Farm Facility is a partnership between FAO, IID, IUCN, and AgriCorp. We are 4 implementing partners. We work in 10 core countries plus 7 network countries, and we support forest and farm producer organizations to become agents of change for climate resilience landscapes, and also at the same time improve livelihoods. Now we are in the second phase, and in total, more or less $36 million was delivered to the forest and farm producer organization, and they have managed also to leverage about additional $100 million mainly from the governments where they are in the country where they are living. So we believe very much in the local actions and also partnerships, and very glad to be part of this panel, and also learning from the other panelists the experience and exchange of our work in the countries, and also at global level. We work also at regional and global level. And our presence are in the 3 continents: Latin America, Africa, and Asia. In Asia, our core countries are Nepal and Vietnam, and as a network countries, Myanmar and Indonesia. Over.
Thank you. Well, there are a lot of footprint everywhere in many countries across the globe, and we'd love to learn as well. We're talking about Mobilize Fund, helping farmers and trees, so on and so forth. Well, what can be the key benefit and pain point? Maybe we can find some solution here at the hackathon here. Okay, well, now we have the biofinance. We have someone talking about the biodiversity. Last but not least, 𝗕𝗄𝗄𝗧 from 𝗕𝗂𝗂𝗂 would you us. Would you mind talking a little bit about your job on 𝗕𝗂𝗂𝗂 and your introduction, please?
Hi, I'm Ada from 𝗕𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗁.com. So 𝗕𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗁 is a crowd-giving platform. So it's a crowdfunding for social and environmental projects, mainly based in Thailand. We, from time to time, also raise funds for some other projects outside of Thailand as well, but mostly for the emergency cases, like earthquake in Nepal, for example. And actually, before joining 𝗕𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂, I actually worked for the past 4 years, I run a network called Thai Young Philanthropists Network. So basically, it's a network of young professionals who are interested in the social impact sector, but in the role of supporting all the change makers, be it like non-profit or social entrepreneurs. So mainly like all the work experience for me is from the funding side or funder side, and especially on the next gen philanthropies and citizen philanthropies with the role of 𝗕𝗁𝗓𝗏.com. For 𝗕𝗁𝗓𝗏.com, we actually raise funds for all kind of like social issue and environmental issues. But environment portfolio is one of especially.
Thank you very much. Now we have 3 perspectives, one on crowdfunding and startup herself and build this from to serve a lot of social purposes. We have Johnny talking about the biodiversity, trees, and nature-based solutions, and Ricardo right in the middle in both topics on finance and at the same time in bio. But before we jump into more in-depth discussions, I think one of the first questions that a lot of people may ask when they start listening to this webinar and watching this webinar would be, what is climate finance and what is nature-based solution? And that may be one of the first way to start our discussion. For Ricardo, as someone who works in finance and maybe a little bit more in biodiversity and both worlds as well, what is climate finance and what is the difference? Is it different from traditional financing? And if it is, what is the definition and how different is it? To you, Ricardo.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think the first thing to say is that climate finance can be used in a kind of very narrow sense and in a much broader sense. So you often find that climate finance kind of blurs into other concepts like sustainable finance or green finance, which is I think is fine. In thinking, I think in terms of my experience with BIOFIN, we've been very interested in exploring ways to unlock private finance for climate and nature. So I think the first thing to say is that there's this multitude. There's a multitude of actors in the private sphere that are becoming more and more involved in these kinds of climate considerations, from multinationals to SMEs, banks, all the way to institutional investors, and each of them with a different set of attitudes, approaches, and needs. And from an outsider's perspective, it's interesting to see how these actors are each kind of undergoing this transformation in order to tackle the twin challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss. The traditional risk-return kind of framework that you get in finance, these two very strongly correlated terms, well, now you also have to add impact into the mix. So if you like, the new framework that we're moving towards is this risk return plus now impact. And this transformation does need to happen because if we're going to stand a chance of closing what is a very large financing gap for nature and for climate mitigation and adaptation measures, which can't be filled by governments and philanthropy alone, even though this is the traditional sources of funding. So, for example, for biodiversity in 2019, the global financing gap was between 598 billion and 824 billion US dollars per year. So, likewise, I think we have this mammoth task of shifting trillions over the next several years into renewables to meet the Paris Agreement. So I think the goal is to both increase public and private investments, and also to engage the financial world more fully in creative solutions for climate. So you'll find that there's kind of experiments with new market mechanisms like crowdfunding, and ultimately to try to channel funds to more of these kind of nature-based businesses. So it's about responding to this call to mobilize large-scale investments from more sources, engaging the private and finance sector, supporting startups and green entrepreneurship, and gradually having the structures and tools that brings about a kind of new finance offering that meets both long-term environmental goals and investment goals too.
Right, definitely, and really love that you mentioned that we have a lot of opportunities, like $1 trillion gap that we need to close, and it's not about public anymore, it's also about private sector, and we're no longer talking about risk and return, but what is the impact? And you mentioned a little bit about biodiversity as well. Johnny, would you mind giving a little bit of introduction about nature-based solution, for example, like how trees can do, and what is the definition of the nature-based solution, and maybe a little touch on climate finance as well?
Thank you. I would start mentioning that we all know that nowadays there are politically an increased recognition of this, all these multiple crises that we are facing: poverty and rising inequality, ecosystem degradation, biodiversity loss, health pandemic crisis, and climate change. All of them are interlinked challenge, and we cannot tackle one of them without addressing all the others. They are interconnected. When we talk about the nature-based solutions for climate change, we recognize that these interlinkages among these challenges for our society, and the nature-based solutions build a holistic approach for a more resilient future. There is a lot of research showing that these nature-based solutions can be effective in addressing all these challenges if they put local communities' needs at the head of the actions, and that can be championed at scale by community-based organizations like the Forest and Farm Facility, like the Forest and Farm Producer Organization that the Forest and Farm Facility support. There are a lot of studies on this, and we could share with you the link to this. And what I want to mention that despite of this potential, so many of these focuses on this support of nature-based solution is too much on mitigation. For example, counting carbon, and not on adaptation, which is matters at most for these vulnerable communities in developing countries, which they have very low carbon footprint, but also they are facing impact on this climate change. What we need is to shift more focus on these nature-based solutions that can ensure resilience from the local communities, but at the same time deliver mitigation of emissions. Thank you.
Wow, that's I really like the definition, and also when you mentioned about the local community as well. When we talk about solution in climate, you're totally right. Many people will think about mitigation. That can be the first thing, and think about like doing carbon footprint assessment, so on and so forth. But there are a lot of vulnerable people as well that need help, and nature can be one of the solutions. Now we have both Rick and Johnny mentioned about many things about climate finance and the nature-based solutions. Now, as someone who's been working on mobilizing funds, Rick's talking about mobilizing $1 billion, and in this world of mobilization, your experience from Thai Philanthropic Network, and also especially at 𝗕𝗓, how do you take it? And as someone who create this platform to make some difference, what has been a challenge? What has been a journey that you may want to share?
Okay. So first, I actually see a lot of like shifting in trend in Thai philanthropy about the climate change and environment. Before this, it used to be as someone who ran both TYPN and 𝗕𝗓. environment used to be a very difficult cause to raise funds from the Thai public, mainly because we are quite an resourceful country in terms of nature that people take it a lot for granted. But in the past 2 or 3 years, especially with the rise of the younger generation, that they become much more concerned about the world that they have to live for the next 30, 40, 50 years, that people become much more interested in all these climate issues. At least in reference for 𝗕𝗓𝗃 in the past, we've been around for 8 years already. The first 5 year environmental portfolio is a very small portfolio on 𝗕𝗓𝗃. In the past 3 years, it became one of the biggest, especially this year and last year, for a crowdfunding platform. Can I have my slide? I know that a part of this webinar is actually introducing the climate finance concept to participants of the hackathon, right? And I think crowdfunding could be quite a powerful platform to actually raise funds, especially for the climate change project. And when you are in a very early stage of all this spectrum. So I'm from 𝗕𝗓𝗃.com, a crowdfunding platform that's based in Thailand. Next slide, please. So let me pitch this. I find that in Thailand and actually for Asia too, if you look at the bigger, broader philanthropy or giving market, Asian people, we love education, we love young people, we love youth. And in the country that are undergoing kind of like aging society like Thailand, elderly would be another kind of like cause that people care about. So environment is always like, at least not the top priority. And so in order to, let's say if you've been to hackathon and then you want to kickstart your project, right, and start doing something like not only talking about the climate change, crowdfunding could be one of the powerful platforms. First, I find that especially for early stage project, right, when you need like certain funding to turn your idea into a prototype, or you want to develop like you have one prototype already and you want to develop like prototype 2, 3, 4. Usually the bigger funders, especially on the climate finance, won't give money to the project that have no proof yet, like whether it's successful or not, whether it's the right way to do this. So you need power of the crowd, like people who care about like climate, care about environment to actually chip in. So crowdfunding would be a very good tool. It could be one of the very few tools that financing tool that you might have in order to kickstart your project. And usually for crowdfunding, the scale of the project would be like much smaller than the bigger grantor would give for the climate change projects. So usually they would look for something in a bigger scale, like 1 million USD or like something around there or bigger, right? And usually our small project would not be something that they consider. So other kind of tool like crowdfunding could help. And another one that like for me, I'm actually studying environment, and I feel that environment is not only about like rechanneling money to support the good project, right? You actually need citizen or like a lot of population, like bigger population to support what you do as well, so that you can not only like complete the project, you can do policy advocacy, you can do many more things, or even you can you need to change a lot of people behavior in order to actually save our climate, right? Our planet. So I think that's the good thing about crowdfunding, because you need to communicate to a lot of people and have many people actually support what you do. And that's kind of like, I think it's very integral part of actually succeeding in the whole climate change movement. You need a lot of people to support you, and this is a very good exercise for you to actually do that and build the crowd that support your project. And the last one is actually the same point that Johnny mentioned before. I find that in all the climate finance landscape, right, a lot of funding actually go to mitigation. Partly it could be because there is like a carbon market up there, or Dow Jones Sustainability Index have the tick box for that, right? Mostly is mitigation, like how much carbon you actually save, like what is carbon footprint and all. But the more important thing, even if right now we stop producing extra carbon, right? Climate change already happening, so you need to adapt anyway. but funding for climate change adaptation is very limited, especially from the bigger funders. So you need alternative tool to channel resources for adaptation. So this could be one. Oh, okay. So actually, that's currently the overall picture of crowdfunding. You don't need to use 𝗕𝗓. And if you want to know more about 𝗕𝗓, we can talk about this later, so that we can talk about some other topics.
Definitely, and I love the little cat here. You can see as well. So that's a logo of 𝗕𝗓. You mentioned about rechanneling money, and also I also love that we're talking about the private finance, that we no longer need to depend on public sector and NGO. More players from the other sectors will need to be playing in this field to save the climate as well. The next question I may want to ask would be, first, what makes private sector, like private sector or bank or private bank, want to jump in and do something good and rechanneling their loan or their financing resource to this impactful project? And talking about the challenge as well, what has been the key challenge in terms of climate finance, especially when it comes to nature-based solution or biodiversity financing as well? And to you, Rick. I think you may need to unmute, sorry.
Okay, sorry about that. Based on some of my experiences with BIOFIN in Thailand, I think a major challenge is still to increase understanding about the value of nature overall. So the government of Thailand needs to improve the country's understanding of its natural assets, and this also includes an awareness of the cost risks of inaction. And so I'll just say a couple of headline statistics. So half of the world's GDP is highly or moderately dependent on nature. And certainly a large percentage of Thailand's GDP is dependent on nature. Another one is for every dollar spent on nature restoration, at least $9 of economic benefit can be expected in return. So again, we're talking about trillions of dollars, but the problem is that these numbers appear more in scientific papers than they do in. They should really be embedded in the economy and in national accounts too. So I think following on from that, so a second challenge in terms of finance for biodiversity is to increase awareness of innovative financing tools. And this also relates to a lack of metrics and measurements. So when we first started, when we first began writing this biodiversity finance plan for Thailand, we got a discussion going between the different stakeholders on the range of possibilities when it comes to the types of financing mechanisms that can be applied for biodiversity conservation. And BIOFIN, for example, has catalogued over 100 different finance solutions globally, and the possibility of implementing other finance alternatives, which can potentially push the envelope for a country like Thailand. And I would say that those supporting the sector's development need to coordinate to ensure that there's an awareness of this spectrum of the financing options available for nature. So then we can, I think, create a truly cross-sector strategy around the possibilities for the field's development. So right now it's somewhat of a challenge when working with conservation organizations that don't have a lot of experience with finance, and vice versa. So new partnerships are necessary. Working with different legal structures is also very desirable. And as I said, this requires a degree of financial expertise and experience, which is not common. And I'll just highlight a third challenge in the context of financing nature-based solutions, and that's something that Ada also mentioned, is that nature-based solutions are often too small. They're often kind of too high risk to attract investors. So this is a kind of referring here to kind of challenges on the supply side. So projects, we find they're often tailored, tend to be tailored to local conditions, and these pilots can take time to get off the ground, and many of the effects tend to be are long term. So all of this poses challenges if you want to replicate and scale up. On the other hand, smaller scale investments may be more attractive to more kind of active or mission-led investors or high net worth individuals. So it's worth exploring on that side too.
Right, thank you. That's very interesting facts about the challenge. And just a little bit of follow-on questions quickly. You mentioned that you assess, as part of developing this BIOFIN project, you assess a number of innovative financing tools. And would love to learn as well, how do you assess that and what can be the criteria to tell, okay, this financial model works in case some startups want to do something about climate finance and invent something during this hackathon? How can they tell that this idea is actually work, this idea, that we need to kill it?
So I kind of talking about the proposal kind of process, right, and the bankability of the proposal from a project. I think the first thing is that kind of bankability is kind of understood and perceived differently among different stakeholders. But it is certainly at the core of developing a successful kind of project proposal. So, for example, most international climate funds place emphasis on, amongst other aspects, on a project's scalability and the contribution of the project to kind of long-term transformation at the country level. And these are often kind of important determinants of a project's bankability. So I think the project will need to demonstrate a kind of a potential for a paradigm shift, because we're really talking about a paradigm shift towards low emission and climate resilient development pathways.
Right, definitely. Thank you very much. So it must be bankable at the beginning, and therefore the impact will follow, and so on and so forth. And then, as you mentioned about one of the challenges, nature-based solutions sometimes tend to be small and it's hard to scale when they're really localized. But it's not a bad idea, and also very good, because in the end we'll also work in the local level. Having someone who's been working with the community for a very long time, and a lot of community-based solution on both adaptations and mitigation, especially adaptations. Johnny, what has been the trend that we can see in terms of nature-based solutions, and would you mind sharing the trend of the solution that we may see in the future in terms of nature-based solution, and maybe a little touch on how to scale those impactful projects and actually scale the impact in the national or regional level?
Thank you. First, I would want to start building on adding some other challenges, and then after that, some kind of pathway for the solution. So one of the challenges is lacking of funds. These nature-based solutions could provide around a third of the most cost-effective climate change mitigation that is needed until 2030. Is 1/3 of the cost-effective mitigation, while also helping at the same time reverse the biodiversity loss, helping people to adapt to the changes that are happening. However, all these nature-based solutions, for example, agriculture, forestry, and land-related initiatives, have now struggling for funding. A figure, less than 30% of the global climate investment currently goes to support nature-based solutions. 30%, and the potential, as I mentioned, is 1/3 of the climate change mitigation that is needed until 2030. Another thing that I want to point out is that so it is not flowing to where it matters. This 3% that is now it is very small. Even less is going actually to the local communities and the champions of this nature-based solution, like the forest and farm producer organizations that we are supporting. Another data, from 2003 until 2016, less than 10% of all the global climate funds was earmarked for local action, less than 10%. So there is a strong evidence that it is missing this missing middle on this finance provision. We have here from the previous panelists, there are small grants, very small, for innovation and piloting. That is existing, but also there are existing very larger investment. But for which kind of stakeholders? For proven approaches, bankable business proposals. What is missing? Very little finance is available for incubating innovative approaches that support early growing, learning, doing mistakes, doing something wrong, but adjusting with the experience. That is much needed. And this finances for this missing middle going to the people who are doing action at the local level. Other thing that I want to mention is this not flowing long enough, because we are now in struggling with this focusing on financing short-term and sectoral projects. So short-term projects with outcomes, outputs, and should be delivered in a timeline. Climate finance does not match the scale of all these challenges that especially the developing countries are facing in tackling the poverty, climate, and natural crisis now. But evidence show that local-based collective organizations like the forest and farm producer organizations can build social capital for long-term resilience. They live in this landscape, so they are not foreigners. They have lived also, the ancestors also. They could mobilize, support, and scale up these natural-based solutions. However, their capacity is very critical for scaling up. We have been listening also that, yes, they have this lacking of capacity. And currently, there is a lack of this long-term funding to support this kind of local collective organization. The Forest and Farm Facility is working with them. I want to mention also following. Now this is emerging discussion on this building back better. And in the coming months, we have a great opportunity to build the innovation, knowledge, and experience of all these local actors into a force to tackle this world evolving and interlinking challenges. There is a growing appreciation of the nature due this COVID-19. Thus can provide a very strong policy support to nature-based solutions. Today, governments at national, local level, everywhere, they are mapping out their plans for economic recovery for this pandemic. And we have here millions of dollars have been identified. That means that here there is an opportunity. These national and subnational governments, when they are designing these recovery plans, they could prioritize this integrating nature-based solutions as an approach. Over.
Thank you. That's very interesting, and also love that you mentioned about the green recovery as well. There are a lot of resources that are put there to boost our economy to be back on track again. But how can we boost our economy and at the same time not go back to the world before where we may not treat the nature and the climate as well as we can do. And I also love that you mentioned about funding the incubation phase startups and funding the ideation phase startup, that there were a lot of room for opportunities for us to find some way to do that. As someone who has been really successful in terms of mobilizing the fund, especially for ideation and the early stage startup 𝗕𝗓𝗄𝗧, what can be the takeaway and what has been the challenge and maybe the success case and the something that the audience and the participant can think about when they want to find some solution to mobilize those funds for this incubation process startups?
Let me first touch on the challenges of how you can actually mobilize more funds to support climate change projects. I heard the other two speakers talking about like different challenges that they face. One thing as a philanthropist or as someone who actually put in money on climate change and trying to get my friends to support all these causes as well. One of the biggest problem that I think we need to overcome is actually educating the donors more. For example, certain technical words like biodiversity, right? Like not many people actually know what it is. Or even people who know what biodiversity is, they can't actually relate that to a bigger macro problem, or like how biodiversity or lack of it would affect their life. And if we can find a way to educate donors or even like general public more of those things, then it actually activate people to take action or like shift in their resources to support all this project. And I mentioned about education. It's not only about terminology of certain words that we might mention a lot in climate change world ecosystem, but it also when we the other two speaker mentioned about like short-term and long-term funding, right? If they don't understand usually how giving work of philanthropy or grant or even investment, they actually want the return fast, or we want to give like year on year rather than commit to something longer term. But if that would be one of the key factors to ensure that the project related to climate adaptation, climate mitigation would succeed, that would be something that you need to communicate to donors or like people to know. It might sound like common sense to someone who work in an environment, but it might not be that obvious to someone else. I think that one of the current challenges that I think we all face right now in order to induce more private investment or donation into the sector. And just go back to 𝗕𝗓𝗄𝗧, to crowdfunding platform. The one that have been very successful so far in actually getting people to donate. They actually don't talk much about the key issue itself, but use some other tactics like using so one of the most successful projects on 𝗕𝗓𝗄𝗧 so far on environment is run and initiated by one celebrity in Thailand, a singer, 𝗀𝗀𝗀, an actor. And when the person who talk about the issue is someone that a lot of people already know, so the voice become so he has more voice in the society. And I think for me personally, I think it's a good way to go when you are talking about the issue that not a lot of people might not be aware of, or people might heard about it, but not empathize to why they need to shift in, they need to take more action in order to support them. Getting people who a lot of people will listen might be a good way to go. So celebrity endorsement, getting all the influencer, be it macro or micro influencer, to help you communicate about this issue. I think that would be one of the way to go for at least in Asian culture. And another thing that if you want to actually draw more support, financial support from institutional donors or private investor, institutional investor, for me as an economist, I think you need to get the incentive right. like in the past 10 years, we see more investment or more resource allocated to environmental cause of project in Thailand because maybe the stock exchange of Thailand have this like sustainability award that company would want to have this award, right? And all these like supporting environmental project is one of the criteria or the judging criteria that they have that incentivize a lot of company that might not invest in environment initially to shift their CSR budget or resources toward more climate finance. So I think thinking of the right incentive for different group of people that you want to actually approach them would be a way to actually draw many more resources into the sector. And for the people attending the hackathon, I think what would be the challenge that if you tackle might be able to help us a lot. I probably see two things. One thing is like when we talk about incubator, right? Like we need more money to incubate for incubator to incubate new projects. And then even if the project goes to incubator, then they will reach the middle gap, right? The one that no one want to fund, like from early stage all the way to growth. So usually the funding is either on a very early stage or either on the growth stage, but missing middle. I think we need intermediary or integrator or aggregator. Like for me, even I want to support adaptation project on the ground, right? But the cost of like trying to find that project and then keep communicating until you give money and then see the project through is actually a lot of work along the way. So usually people then make it easier, so they just go for the bigger project, right? So they don't have to do all this legwork. If we can find more aggregator, like more intermediary that work with all these small project or people-based, community-based project and aggregate them together and try to get funding to support them all collectively, that might be an easier way to reach the donor side. So that's the idea I have now. We need education, be it donors or even like general public more, so that actually is the most challenging issue for global citizen. It's beyond COVID and everything. People just need to know that.
Right, definitely, and that's a lot of good insight there. Just very quick follow-up question. What if I don't know any influencer? And that's the first thing. What should I do to get attention of the people? And the second thing would be, 𝗕𝗓 has been working a lot with not organization alone, but also the personal level to mobilize the fund of the personal pocket. What has been the key tickers for people like me, like Rick, like Johnny, like you, to actually put our money into it? And what if the startup want to do that, to do the same? What should they consider? And maybe this can be like you can use this to look at the time to close it as well for your side. That'll be a very good ending.
Yes. So for 𝗕𝗓, usually you need like word of mouth. That work quite well in Asia. I'm not sure about somewhere else. So at the beginning, when you want to raise funds from someone, right, you look around your Facebook, maybe like your Facebook newsfeed, and try to get the people who already share news about environment. So start with a small group, someone that you already know. Don't have to be famous. Could be your friend, like someone in your close loop, right? That already understand this issue and then care about this issue, and then get them to support you, and then ask them to help you spread the word, right, into their network. And that's how actually not only environmental project, but most of the project that's successful in raising fund on 𝗕𝗓, they start with the small group first, the one that who already know and care, because they would have their own way to communicate why they care about this certain project, right? So that's how things work. And so if you are interested in, like, let's say if you go through hackathon and then you want to start something or even try, I think crowdfunding is a good exercise when you don't know how to communicate yet, to use it as kind of like a sandbox or a where you can start like learning how to communicate and get the real feedback. Because if you communicate well and then people donate, then you know that you are communicating the right thing, right? And if it's not, then you can shift, like you can use some other message to communicate about the same project and see what would be the feedback, whether like people donate more. So for me, it's a good exercise to do all this stuff. So check out 𝗕𝗂𝗋𝗃.com. So basically, you can look at the website and.
All right. Wow, that's amazing. One, please look at 𝗕𝗂𝗋𝗃.com, and well, that's a lot of good insights there. And as you mentioned about educating, and someone might not even know what is biodiversity, and I think Rick can give you a very clear definition of that. And maybe we would love to ask you to end this as well, not only talking about like maybe what is diversity and the trend of the biodiversity-based, nature-based solutions in the future. What can be the trend? And what would you like to leave for the people who want to attend this hackathon to think about during these 2 days? What should they think about? What are those opportunities for biodiversity finance and nature-based / climate finance? To you, Rick.
Great. Yeah, thank you. No, I agree with everything that Gunnar said there as well, in terms of the missing middle. So just on terms of trends then, so we've been hearing how nature-based solutions are about creating resilience as well as sustainability, and so the idea is that nature is our kind of greatest ally to achieve this. So nature-based solutions are about maximizing synergies between ecosystem preservation and ultimately human well-being, right? So there's this kind of realization that perhaps man-made ecosystems are actually pretty poor substitutes for their natural counterparts. So, for example, tree plantations as crops of trees store far less carbon than natural forests do, and they also require much more upkeep. So, these plantations also have nowhere near the complex biodiversity that you'd find in natural forests. So I think the main trend is that nature-based solutions are gaining popularity among both governments and businesses worldwide. And this seems to be because these solutions, nature-based solutions, offers a more holistic view of responding to a challenge like climate change. So the narrative now is not so much nature or people, it's nature and people. And this ties to this narrative of how nature-based solutions can achieve multiple benefits beyond strictly climate and biodiversity benefits. So you can have a multitude of potential benefits from physical to socioeconomic to kind of well-being and even mental health benefits too. So I'll just finish off because I know that we're a bit tight for time. As we've been saying, a lot of these finance mechanisms are new, and the solutions are often being piloted in kind of specific cases, and not that many people really know much about them. So what we really need to do is to move from these kind of interesting pilot projects to a scaled up sort of mainstream level, and there's still a lot of work to do there. So I think from a government perspective, we still have to build a lot of political understanding, political interest, and we have to continue talking not just to environment ministries but also to finance ministry. I think we really need to keep making this case. I think that nature, for the value of nature, and the risk reduction mechanism, and why when we're talking about climate adaptation, nature really has to be one of the first things we think about. It's not just an afterthought in that sense. It has to be built into a comprehensive approach. And just just the last thing very quickly on the private side then. So keep on developing a clearer picture around the business case, identify revenue streams, and also we need to put in place a kind of a good system for gathering data on impacts, and all these things will give investors confidence. Thanks.
Wow, I also love that you mentioned about data and impact. In the end, we need to track on all the M&E to know exactly how much impact we created. And last but not least, Johnny, what would be your take, and what would you like to leave for the participant to think about when it comes to nature-based solution? And also love it so much when you talk about the adaptation, working with communities. When we think about nature-based solution, climate solution, we think about mitigation, but your example is great that it can also be adaptation. It worked perfectly as well. If someone want to come to the event and think about it, some new idea, what should they think about, and what would be the last thought you would leave to them?
Thank you. Being together with you, all young people, I really think that we need to invest in tomorrow's leaders. Working towards long-term goals must recognize the leadership of young people and also women. Both groups continue to be marginalized for these high-level decision-making processes. They could participate as volunteers or short-term, but not in the decision-making. Both young people, women, they play important role in their communities, preparing for the future disasters, sharing climate information, and protecting children. I also want to emphasize following. We should not talk about silos, isolated things. We should think in the interface, for example, in the knowledge. We should think how we could interface this traditional and ancestral knowledge from the indigenous peoples, our elder people, with this modern knowledge to find solutions to the current challenges. I want to also to point out that what I have been mentioning, solutions that address current multiple and complex challenges cannot be developed rapidly. And sometimes this financial world, they are waiting quick solutions, quick outputs, quick results. It takes time to build these institutional capacities of these local people, local organizations in the countries where these solutions are most needed, especially these developing countries. This requires, of course, local producer organizations that could innovate, adapt, learn from mistakes, and build partnerships, incubating ideas. This climate finance need to reach these local levels, and developing partners and governments need to provide this long-term investment to make this happening. Thank you.
Wow, that's amazing. We talk about long-term, local, and ownership. Thank you very much, ખ્ուն-Ａida, Johnny, and Rick. I think that was a very great presentation for today. I'll just summarize a bit about what we have been discussing for the whole session, 1 hour today. So we start by talking about climate change. What is it? Climate change and climate finance. It may be in the blur area between sustainable finance and green finance, but in the end, when we talk about climate change, it's no longer about just risk and return assessment. It also you also mentioned about impact. We also need to talk about the impact that we actually create from those mobilization with the fund. We're not talking only about the private sector or NGO, the UN, so on and so forth, but public sector, I mean. But we also talk about the private sector that should play a big role in terms of mobilizing fund and their fund to this impactful and climate benefit project as well. That would be the first thing that the participant like you and anyone who watched this can think about it. If you talk to climate, what can be the mechanism? What can be the solution to bring those capital, to bring those investment to this climate benefit project around the world? And that would be the first thing we talk about, climate finance. The second thing is biodiversity. We talk a lot about biodiversity and nature-based solutions. And I love that Johnny mentioned as well that is all interlinked. We talk about COVID, we talk about climate change, biodiversity. Actually, all of those are interlinked. And therefore, we cannot solve one thing and leave the other and not touch it. It's all we need is the holistic approach to solve it all at once and to create more resilient society, more resilient environment ecosystem. And in the end, it comes back to the community-based solution, we need it. I love that Johnny just mentioned as well, we have to have local people and take ownership of it. Last but not least, we also talk about the innovations in terms of like finance tool, like Rick mentioned. We need more bankable solution. We need more solution that have a good revenue stream and good cross structure that can be resilient itself in terms of your financial situation as well. And if you think about it, if you want to do something good in the end, you have to be surviving in the market as well. And that could be one of the first things if you talk about innovative financing tools and in fact any solutions. The crowdfunding, like Ada mentioned, is one of the very impactful platform for you, for anyone, for organization, individuals like you, like me, like anyone who's watching this at home, to actually support those early stage startup, those impactful ideation stage, the prototyping stage project. But also, there are also another challenge that we have in the middle stage. They're not in the ideation state. At the same time, they're not in growth stage. I love that you mentioned, and the Kuneda mentioned as well, about the aggregator. You may also think of it during those hackathon, how to aggregate those projects and actually make it bankable, like Rick may say. Finally, I really like that everyone like on the same page. We also need data. We also need the right incentive. It depends on who we are working with. It depends on who will be your target clients. Right incentive for those group of people will be very significant to your success. And in the end, if you want to do something good, everyone can say we do great, we do amazing. That's a lot of good job out there. But how can we assess it? It comes to data to measure those impact. And also, like we just mentioned lately, it's long-term. All panelists today all agree that we cannot change all of this one night. Tomorrow morning, we got a new world. It's long-term. Take it a slow step and meet resilience. Take ownership, localize the solution, and that can be one of the ways we can think about. Now, if you learn all of this and think about it, and we would love to see you on the 7th and 8th November, this just the month from now, in Bangkok Climate Change Hackathon at 𝗕𝗂𝗧 𝗕𝗵. And to end this, I like that what I think Ada mentioned about it. One of the questions we may want to ask ourselves, and I do believe that everyone here agrees, is in what world that we want to live in the next 40, 70 years? It may not have a lot of people to support you in the first place. It may be just a small group, but just find those small group who cares about these topics. And those can be you as well who are watching this right now. And that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching. And thank you, Kuneda, Rick, and Johnny, for our amazing session today. ขอบคุณครับ Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice evening.
Bye.